Thank you and welcome back. So I hope you're all refreshed and relieved after that short break. We're now going to be presented to by Nikos, who's going to be talking to us about React Static, an alternative library to Gatsby for generating static websites. I hope that's a good enough intro. So warm welcome, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm really nervous, so don't expect too much. But you know, the title of this talk is intentionally a little bit cheeky, but in reality, it's just our story of how we had a problem and we decided to solve it using a little less known tool called React Static. My name is Nikos. I'm a tech lead at Hostmaker. I've been a front-end developer for the past 5 years, using React for the past 2. Hostmaker is a home rental management startup based here in London, but we have our cities all over the world, so like Thailand, the rest of Europe. And just like Beamery, at some point in our life, we had made it. We had survived long enough for a rewrite. And that's an important milestone in a startup's life. And we decided at that point to pick React and Node, just like all other successful startups. And we had kind of gone through this entire migration process. It took us a little bit over a year, but in the end, we were mostly there, except this one kind of crucial part of our entire product stack, and that's our website. So our website, as of 6 months ago, was still written using the legacy stack that we had been using like way back before. That was written by a third-party consultancy, the usual stuff. It had, it was slow. We had gone through some optimization sprints where we had tried to do all sorts of things to make the dead horse run faster, but it obviously didn't work very well. We had extremely slow builds due to one of those measures we had tried to take. So we had tried manually optimizing all the images in our application, and that basically led to like 25-minute build times, which is not super nice. And so at some point, half a year ago, the business said that, hey, we kind of need a brand refresh. We've been here with this website for a few years now. And so the tech kind of jumped, hey, let's do a rewrite. Those are always fun. So initially, we tried to look at the kinds of challenges that we're facing. And one of the biggest one is we have a lot of content. So I've mentioned that we're in multiple cities. That's 9. 9 different cities and like 6 country hubs for like country-specific information. Each of those have about 2 languages each. So it's English and the local language. And we basically have to have all of that unique content across 15 routes or templates or however you want to call it. So these are your homepage, about page, and that sort of stuff. We also had a bunch of dynamically generated content, and we knew we wanted more in the long term. So that's like translations, Cosmic for content management, Greenhouse for careers API, and that sort of stuff. In the end, that amounted to like over 1,500 unique pages, each with their own unique content and unique routes. And we knew we had to support that during our rewrite. We also knew that we wanted to have a good search engine optimization story. So Google is the only one that kind of basically handles client-side web applications. And we wanted to have some sort of static rendering where all the content is available to all the other disenfranchised robots. And well, we also wanted to improve our page speed. As I mentioned, the old legacy website was kind of just not cutting it anymore. We didn't want to be probably fetching all of that dynamic content on every load, since that usually takes a lot of time. But we had all these, and it's difficult. It's really difficult to sell to a business. Hey, we're gonna go away for 3 months, and then maybe you'll have a website, and just hold your marketing, hold all the campaigns, all the tube stuff, etc. So that's difficult to sell. So we didn't want to do that. We knew we would never get away with it. So we wanted to migrate something to use something that would allow us to migrate iteratively. So to recap, we were looking for something that was React-based. Just like all of our other products, we had migrated to a React-based stack. We knew we wanted something flexible, so it would have to integrate with our existing code base, and support the iterative migration that I talked about. We also knew that we wanted something fairly simple. So since we've done the migration to Node and React and all that, we didn't start off without any employees, and those people had to learn new technology, and we didn't really want to overwhelm them with, say something like GraphQL or, hey, everything you knew before is now useless. So we wanted something that even our full stack developers could easily go and change and have an impact on. And most importantly, we wanted something long-term. So we didn't want to do another rewrite half a year from now. And we knew we wanted something that would allow us to change strategies and evolve over time. So considering our previous experience, we were basically inspired by two things. Me personally, I have done. Who else here has used GitHub Pages? Probably quite a lot of you. I've got my own personal website on GitHub Pages. It seems like a very easy way to develop things. You just basically, you have a build tool. You put all your static content there, and your blog posts, etc. And you just click build. It's up there. You commit it to GitHub, and it's live. And that simplicity really resonated with us. Also at that time, Gatsby was getting popular. So, one of those 15 newsletters you receive every day about JavaScript, that was always talking about how static generated sites are the future. So we decided, why not use a static site generator for our basically marketing website? That's mostly static content. Surely it should work. So we started looking at the kinds of static site generators that there are. And we immediately we knew we wanted to look at something React-based, so we kind of focused on that. And basically, there were a few large ones, and we just started going through each of them. So the first one up was Next.js, and these graphs are sorted by GitHub stars, the most important popularity metric in the world. Next.js is basically a framework for server-side rendered and isomorphic JavaScript applications. And we were actually even using that at the moment for one of our other applications. So it seemed like a great fit. Actually, we found out that it also, at some point, had added Next Export, which allowed pre-built apps. So it seemed like a very good use case for us. But considering our experience, even though it's a great framework, it's well documented, it's got a large community, in our other application, we felt that it was too much of a framework, and you basically were coding in Next.js rather than React. It had too much of a predefined structure, and in our case, we found it to be slow and difficult to optimize because it was just so complicated. There was a lot of things going on, and it was just difficult to actually figure out why and how things were breaking exactly. So going back to our scorecard that we were looking at, it was definitely React-based, but other than that, it didn't really strike us as the best option forward. So we kept looking. And we looked at Gatsby, which is basically right now, it's the de facto static site generator for React. It's basically everywhere. It's becoming a startup in its own sense. And well, Gatsby, in short, it's well documented. It's got a huge community. It's really fast and really powerful. It's basically what everyone's looking for. But for us specifically, we found a few problems. So I mentioned before that we didn't want to overwhelm our users who are new to React and that sort of stuff with even more new technology. And GraphQL really proved to be an issue. Basically, if you're coding Gatsby, you're using GraphQL, and that there's not a good way around it. It's also very plugin heavy. So basically, if you need to use a custom source or something like that, you kind of have to write your own plugin. And writing your own plugin seems daunting to us. We didn't really want to get into that kind of business. Of course, there are a lot of pre-configured plugins and that sort of stuff, but then you're at the mercy of the plugin maintainer. And if they don't implement something you don't like, you either have to do it yourself or hope that pull request gets merged in. So coming back to our scoreboard again, it was definitely React-based. It was definitely flexible, so it would allow us to do basically anything we wanted. And it would definitely scale long-term, considering other people's experience. But we didn't find it simple enough. So at this point, we were kind of at crossroads. We had two clear options, two well-supported ones. So why are we talking about this one then? I'm glad you like that. So, you know those people who like follow 900 different newsletters and like get everything, and they somehow have started all the libraries on JavaScript? I know most of you have that friend. So one of those colleagues actually recommended React Static to us. He had looked at it, started on GitHub, and we investigated it. So React Static is basically a fast, lightweight, and a powerful framework. At least that's what they claim, for building static progressive React applications. And the main promise of React Static is the power of Gatsby without all the complexity of it. And that is just React. And that really resonated with us. So initially when we were looking at, I hope this loads. Initially when we were looking at different frameworks, we looked at Gatsby and we, going through the documentation, we're gonna need dynamic pages, everyone does. I'm kind of looking, section 7 of the documentation, and that was really the thing that actually kicked us to look for something else. And in comparison, React Static is refreshingly simple. It's basically, it's got this one function, and you just kind of, return your routes and do whatever you want, and just like, have fun. So the simple part about React Static is that it's only got 2 main concepts, and once you know those, you're kind of ready to go. The first thing is it's basically, so take your regular React application. It's got a folder structure. As long as you implement those 2 files, this is static config.js, which is the entry point, and the app.js, which is kind of where your React mounts in, then you're good to go. So going through static config.js first, it's basically a big JSON file. You have a function. You have a JavaScript file, and then you just return your JSON. One of those is the get routes property, where you just like you can do whatever you want as long as it works in an asynchronous function. And then you just return your routes that you want to use. You can then supply data and other kinds of configuration values for building like route maps and that sort of stuff. But you can see that we're getting some data here. But the best part is that to generate dynamic routes, I showed you the Gatsby version of doing that. Here's how you do it in React Static. You just basically, you map over it, and you create your route definitions, and that's it. That's very refreshingly simple. So now that you have all of those route definitions created in React Static, you basically, React Static during build time exports all of them as a separate module, which you can then import in your application.js file, app.js file, and then just use it. So this is like a pyramid of death of providers, React 16. But essentially what's important here is that you can get all of those routes. It's this tiny little routes component. Those will all be built during build time and injected there. But you can also add your own dynamic routes. So for something like sign up, where you want to have a lot of dynamic data, which depends on the user, you can also add those. So it doesn't, it's not just static content. You can actually add dynamic stuff as well. So back to our scoreboard. And this one really ticked all the boxes for us. It was definitely React-based. It was very, very, very flexible. As you saw, it's basically 2 files, and other than that, just do what you want. It was extremely simple to the point where it was slightly scary. And we felt that it could scale long-term. All of that simplicity meant that we could basically choose what we want. We could add like caching, fetching strategies, that sort of stuff. Everyone can implement a function, and that's where you start with React Static. So the main drawback with React Static was that, well, this is a little scary. You're rewriting, you're going away for at least a significant amount of time. So it was a little bit daunting. But we figured, whatever. Worst case, we spend a few days, throw everything out, right, in React, in Gatsby, and just call it a day. So we went with it. We spent about 1 month implementing the first 3 or 4 pages for the initial launch, as well as our entire sign-up flow. We kept all of the other pages the same, and we actually were able to launch quite successfully. Of course, there was always stress, but who doesn't like stress in this job? So I'll first talk about what went well. So the first, and I think the most important part for us, was that it was very customizable. It integrated very well with all of our existing code base. So we're actually at one point we were running multiple servers on the same project, and we were running both React Static, which we then built and exported all that, and we were running our old legacy Express-based proxy server, which would do all kinds of crazy stuff. But importantly, it would serve the static files that React Static would build. And we also were able to tailor it to our needs. So we were using stuff like CSS modules with Sass to build our styles. We're using things like ImageX to load all of our dynamic images. We had a ton of translations and localized content, which we would all load during build time. We would, have our own Webpack config. Basically, whatever we wanted, we could get, including a great development experience. So obviously, it supports the basics like hot reloading. Everyone does right now. But it also had pretty good detailed logging when something did go wrong, which it didn't often. And it was mostly our fault as well. So yeah, that's good to know. As far as performance goes, it was pretty much great out of the box. To this point, we haven't gone through, it's now what, 6 months after the initial decision to rewrite everything, and 4 months after we've been live. And we haven't gone through any optimization sprint so far, and it still works quite well. It's basically doing a lot of things that you would care about yourself. So it does code splitting, it minimizes everything, it just kind of works. But it also, despite not doing any of that, it gives us the option to. So it's very easy to add things like code splitting and dynamic loading and further minimize everything. And basically, that's what we're going to spend some time on in the next following weeks. But it's great that we have the option to. But maybe last but not least, it did everything we asked it to. So at the start, we started with 500 pre-built pages. So imagine each page has a different URL. They have unique content completely, which was really fun for our translators. And we're now up to 1,500. We're now loading data from about 12 endpoints at build time, which is pretty significant, I think. And all of that only means 3-minute build time. So it is fast. It works definitely for scaling long term, and we're very happy with that part. Of course, there were a few things that didn't go that well. So the first thing, you remember that get routes slide? Well, that's kind of the documentation everywhere. It covers everything, but sometimes it's frustratingly short on actual content. But on the bright side, the source was easy to understand. So if Gatsby, when you look at that, it's just, it's complicated. It's a huge beast. It's powerful. It's all that, and it's scary to go in. But with this, we're actually going okay, this doesn't work. Why? And you go and just look and you figure it out. So that's, it's not perfect, but it's a way out. And one thing that was, kind of a surprise to us was, even though there's no server in statically generated sites, there's still a build step, which is basically kind of similar to that. So you always have to keep in mind that your code might be running on Node or on the client. So you can't use stuff like local storage and that kind of thing. And you can't always use the obvious solution. And this leads us to our main takeaway from the entire thing is, if possible, always stay in React land. So I'll illustrate this with an example. We basically have this function called getLocale. So we are running in a bunch of cities. We basically have a lot of localized content. So all over the application, we need to get the current locale, which is the city and the language. And we need to use that to render data and routes and that sort of thing. And it's basically the most important part of our application and where we've had the most issues with architecturally. So the standard approach to solving this is just hey, let's do a service, let's call the method, and it just will get the locale from the URL or something like that. And that actually, we went with that at first, and it worked great in development, and until we launched, and in QA and everything like that. And then after about a week of running in production, we started seeing the Google results not being what we expected them to be. So the problem with that is, with this approach, is that this is not built into the pre-built files. So it's all perfectly fine when it actually bootstraps the entire JavaScript application and it just kind of refreshes all your things. But the robots see the default language, see the default city, and that doesn't work for SEO. So that was a difficult one to find, actually. When we thought about a possible solution, some things immediately jumped at us. So you remember that getRoutes function. You can inject your data into all of those routes, and when they're built, you'll be able to retrieve that data with like a higher order component that just injects the data into your props. And we needed to store some data globally. So, React 16 had just come out. Why not use the React context? That's what we did. We created, so you see the route data component there. And that's basically retrieving all of the get data props that you passed in through your route configuration, which is basically, we create a bunch of providers and we inject them with the actual props that we get from the route configuration. And then we take those and we use a higher order component to inject those into our child components, very, very deep down the application. And that's how we solved our localization issue. We had no more mismatches during build and runtime, so that started working suddenly much simpler and much more perfect. And we also, since then, we've kind of started using providers and context everywhere. They've worked really well for us in making this website. So when we actually went on to other products and just kind of rewrite those as well, we started using providers and context there as well. We're actually at this point, we're kind of fighting a war in Redux and just replacing that with React 16 context. So, speaking of context, I'm going to talk a little bit about a different kind of context. After some time, actually, during preparing for this for this talk, I figured there must be a name for what we've been doing. So I looked around, and it turns out there is. It's called the Jamstack, which is a weird name, but it stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And the whole idea is that basically you take, it's not a stack specifically of technology, it's just the general idea of how you can build applications. And the whole idea is to take all of your JavaScript that will generate your dynamic content, all of the markup that's just templates basically, and use your APIs during build time to get like your build artifacts. And that has a few important benefits. So remember GitHub pages, that's basically a Jamstack, part of Jamstack. And the deployment there is extremely easy. You push to GitHub. And you can also upload everything to a CDN because it's just static files. It's also extremely, extremely fast because, hey, if you need more performance, you just add more CDN. You don't need to wait for content, no loading screens, etc. And most importantly, for me personally, it has a great dev experience. So if you're building like a personal website or something like that, you can't really beat free. And there are a lot of services that provide, that allow you to use these static sites for free. So GitHub pages, Netlify, etc. There's like a bunch of them. And also important is that it has great reproducible builds. So when something goes wrong, you just run the build locally and you can go and inspect all of the markup and it works. And you can see the problems and you can fix them. And that's how we saw our problem. A little bit too late, but we got there eventually. And we're not alone in this. So, for example, some of you might know about a small little website called Smashing Magazine. And about a year before us, they actually went through a similar transition where they implemented their own website on Jamstack. They're much bigger than us, so all of their articles are basically loaded through and compiled during build time. They're using Hugo, which is a Go-based similar framework. And yeah, they really increased their performance about 10 times, according to them. So in summary, remember the slide from way back where React Static was the promise of Gatsby without the complexity of it. And we felt that was mostly true. And me personally, I think React Static is going to be the default framework for now on until something else is released, probably tomorrow. But it's going to be the default for me, and it's going to be the default for HostMaker. And we were definitely very happy with it. And, so I'd like to thank you. And you can also see the live demo at hostmaker.com/careers. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you, Nikas. Do we have any questions over here?
So you said that you had 1,500 pages.
Yeah.
Let's say you add a page. Are you going to rebuild all the other pages, or are you going to specifically build that page?
At this point, we're rebuilding everything because it takes 3 minutes. We're okay with that time frame. But in the future, it allows us to dynamically just rebuild the parts which have changed, just like Gatsby does. Of course, Gatsby has a plugin for that, and you just kind of use that. In React Static, you have to kind of look at it and just try to go about it your own way. And there are examples of doing it, but we just haven't come to that point yet where we need to use it.
And I'm guessing that in development, it's much quicker, right?
Yeah. In development, it's instant. Since it's hot reloading, it doesn't actually do anything.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone? Oh, one at the back.
There's one back there.
Feel like challenge, Annika.
Hello. Despite you being nervous, I thought that was a really good talk.
Thank you.
So what do you do any automation around the testing of this to ensure that everything works as it is expected without actually having to do anything manually?
So it's your very usual automation. Basically, the bright side is if the build succeeds, everything works, because if you can't run it, there's no runtime without the build process. So since it does everything on Node, you'll know immediately if the build passes or not. So that's actually, in my perspective, that's a bonus, because it breaks early. Other than that, there's like the regular end-to-end automated tests, and all of those work just the way they would in a regular client-side application. Yeah. Not sure if I answered your question.
Any more?
Another one there. No, I'm joking.
Becca, have you not got the mic?
I do. Oh, where is it?
I think that's it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you again, Nikas, for that. Cheers. Have a round of applause, please.
Thank you.